The 10 best horror movies of all time. 11. The Evil Dead, 1981/Evil Dead 2, 1987. While many would argue that the sequel, which is also sort of a remake at the same time, is vastly superior to the much scrappier original film, it seemed wrong to include one without the other. Evil Dead is a brilliant micro-budget masterpiece about a group of poor saps who awaken a bunch of demons. The sequel is pretty much the same thing, only with a slightly bigger budget and a dark, twisted sense of humor. There's no choosing between the two. Also feel free to finish off the trilogy with 1992's Army of Darkness. 9. Jaws, 1975. Some argue Jaws is not a horror film. I say any movie that made millions of people afraid to go swimming qualifies. It's also a big-time crowd-pleasing adventure movie, but come on. We're all scared of sharks, and Spielberg's foray into blockbusters really taps into that fear on a gut level. Roy Scheider, Richard Dreyfuss, and Robert Shaw's push-to-the-edge dynamic also make it a whole lot of fun. And of course, there's John Williams' primarily unsettling musical score. 8. Nosferatu, 1922. Although not approved by Bram Stoker's estate, which ended up suing and bankrupting the film's production company, this unofficial adaptation of Dracula still holds up as one of the earliest, eeriest examples of vampire cinema. Much of the credit goes to the memorably creepy-looking Max Schreck, who played the titular creature, but director F.W. Murnau deserves high praise for crafting a horror film that's still pretty damn scary after more than 9 decades. 7. The Fly, 1986. 1958 original holds a firm place in horror cinema history, but for my money very few studio horror films come close to the deeply upsetting brilliance of David Cronenberg's 1986 remake. Sure, it's about a guy who swaps a little DNA with a housefly and finds himself transforming into an inhuman monster, but it's also a powerful metaphor for humanity's fear of disease and a tragic love story at the same time. 6. The Thing, 1982. Isolation, alienation, and suspicion are the themes at play in John Carpenter's wonderfully creepy rendition of John Campbell's Who Goes There? Packed with great performances and even better monster effects, it's about a creature who can replicate any living creature, which spells seriously bad news for the guys manning an isolated weather station in the middle of a frozen wasteland. 5. Night of the Living Dead, 1968. You don't come across too many horror films that create their very own subgenre, but that's pretty much what George A. Romero's original Night of the Living Dead pulled off. The word zombie was around long before 1968, but that was the film that introduced legions of reanimated corpses who wander around in large groups and devour any living human they can get their hands on. The original film remains one of the most influential horror movies ever made, and the sequel is pretty much the Casablanca of zombie cinema. 4. Halloween, 1978. John Carpenter set the bar high by naming his slasher Halloween. Luckily, it's a film that millions of people want to revisit each and every October. This simple yet aggressively suspenseful tale of a plucky babysitter and a masked murderer has been ripped off and remade more times than one can count, but very few films come close to approaching its devious yet classy style of scariness. The ambiguity of resident boogeyman Michael Myers is part of what makes the original Halloween so damn creepy, and it's Carpenter's nerve-jangling musical score that amplifies the suspense to almost unbearable levels. 3. Psycho, 1960. Most of Alfred Hitchcock's films could be described as suspenseful, but it wasn't until this 1960 classic that the legendary filmmaker began dabbling in full-bore horror. Anthony Perkins' amazing performance as Mama's boy Norman Bates is only one of this brilliant thriller's big assets, and that nasty jolt of an ending still packs a punch even if you already know what's coming. 2. The Exorcist, 1973. The original, unquestionable, undisputed great-grandpappy of possession horror and one hell of a brutally good time, William Friedkin's The Exorcist is not just one of the scariest films ever made, it's also one of the most well-constructed horror movies of all time. The story of demon-inhabited Regan, her distraught mother, and the two priests working their religious mojo to save her life holds up to repeat viewings, partially because the horrific set pieces still hold up resoundingly well, and also because the actors create realistic, believable characters who are worthy of our empathy. 1. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. There are lots of scary movies out there, and then there are movies that drop you headfirst into an actual nightmare. To be Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre opens with a gruesome sight, slows down just a bit for some mildly creepy setup, then dumps 5 clueless kids into a cannibalistic nightmare that simply doesn't let up until the final credits. For my money, it's one of the purest examples of horror cinema. The movie still creeps me out to this day.